I think that was great. And I have a whole group of questions for the sheriff. So I have a number of questions that go down this path. What's the protocol for law enforcement first officers on scene at an active shooting? What do they do? What's this response protocol? What does the sheriff's office do to engage in an active shooting situation in or outside of the building? Let's see. If there were an active shooting situation, what are deputies' orders? And what is their process to secure the shooter or maybe do something else? And then there's a question here about drills and how often are drills conducted specifically to active shooting type situations. So it's kind of a whole theme of those kinds of things.
Okay. Let's walk through this then. And then we'll talk about, we don't call them drills, we call them training, but we do drills with the school too in regards to this. So all of our cops are trained the same way here in this county. We all have limited resources, including me, including all the chiefs, and we all respond to any threat at the school in mass. So it doesn't matter if it's at the middle school, if it's at the high school, if it's at Frisco Elementary, Upper Blue, Breck Elementary, Silverthorne, Summit Cove, Dillon Valley. It doesn't matter. Whoever's closest is going to go, and then everyone's going to follow, right? But that first officer, that first deputy, whoever gets there first is going to go in, is going to try to locate that shooter, and they're going to try to neutralize the situation. I mean, that is the focus of that first deputy, that first officer, that first group on scene. What we train is behind that, once we are going after the shooter, right, and we are taking up real estate within the school. While this is going on, the students and teachers and staff are following their protocols, which I'll let Travis go into when I'm done. But what's important for you guys to know is, we have now in the last few years recently started training with all of our fire and EMS staff, all of our ambulance staff, to where once we go in the school and those first initial deputies or officers take real estate and go after the shooter and neutralize that situation, the next group of people going in are what we call a rescue task force. And they're made up of cops, and they're made up of fire, and they're made up of ambulance personnel. And their job is to immediately start addressing the wounded, the injured, the bleeding, identify these people, start taking care of them right there in the moment and get them out of the building. And then there's a whole transportation piece waiting outside to get them immediately to a hospital. So that's what's going on. We train this all the time. We use the school buildings when we do it. We use school personnel. We don't usually involve, we don't involve children in the school under 18. We have involved older kids. But school staff, even when they've been on vacation, they come back to the schools because they care and they want to know how this is done. So that's how we train. We do it all the time. We have another one coming up here in May where we'll go through several days of this training I'm talking about, this rescue task force training. But what we do is we put this all in motion. We put it all together. We have an active threat in the school. A team goes in after the threat, and then the rescue team comes in after that, and we start triaging. We use real people with fake injuries. We bring in moulage artists to do this, so it's real for the responders. I'll let Travis talk about, the school district does do lockdown, lockout drills. Law enforcement does get involved in these. I myself just went through 2 of these a week ago with the school district. And so we do them all the time, and I know that the law enforcement. What was really cool is we did one at Dillon Valley Elementary School, and Chief John Miner sent some of his staff over there. So that was cool, and I'm sure if Chief Mark Hemminghouse had staff available, they would have been there. So, I mean, we all know when this is going on, and we all help each other. We're all in this together. So if you want to talk about the lockdown, lockout drills.
Sure. So we drill 1 to 2 times a month. We use as our classroom level procedure something called the Standard Response Protocol, the SRP, that was developed in the wake of the Platte Canyon shooting in Bailey. And I think that was 06. And it involves 4 basic actions based on, it kind of comes from the emergency management world, but based on the location of the threat or the hazard. And I won't make you tell me if you know what the difference is today. Thank you. So those 4 actions are lockdown, lockout, evacuation, and shelter. Now, in terms of how we determine how we drill, the fire department, the state fire department, fire system has gotten state law where fire drills, which we use as evacuation drills. I've made the fire department change their lingo. It's not just about fire anymore. It's about any time we want to get out of the building. So we do evacuation drills by law once a month, but there's an exception for you can replace 2 of those with a different drill. Now, because I want my staff to love me so much, and when I show up, on top of them, I make us, early in the year, in first semester and early second semester, also do 1 lockdown drill per semester, and then we got to hit lockout once, and we got to hit shelter once. And my staff members in the building can tell you how happy they are when I show up twice a month. However, they do take it seriously. We do a lot of joking aside. They do take it real seriously, and what we're preparing for there is what's the hazard, what's the threat, where is it located, and then how are we responding. The other challenging piece, because sometimes drills get a little rote each month, so I work with the response agencies to come up with some variations, so we're testing different aspects of it and challenging things, making things a little more challenging, so we have to think. One of the pieces with lockdown in particular, if you're familiar with the federal guidance around active shooter type situations in public environments, is the federal guidance is run, hide, fight. So you as the public have to make tactical decisions based on what you know about that situation if you're ever in one. And we push that into the teaching staff as well, because there are times when lockdown might not work. For instance, lunch. You've got a couple hundred students in an open cafeteria. Lockdown isn't workable then. So, working with staff to kind of have some understanding of the variables that go into the decisions and give them a little bit of some options that they're aware of and can practice if, we come to a drill and you happen to be out in the hallway. Well, run. I changed the language a little bit to make it a little more school appropriate, but move to a lockdownable space. It might be, we have conversations about it, might be you move outside of the building, because in a lockdown situation, the threat's in the building. An active shooter is in the building. So we try and work through some of those scenarios without making it too complicated on a monthly and sometimes twice a month basis.
So while you're good with the mic, here's a follow-up question. How are the safety drills, do you feel, emotionally impacting students, particularly young students? And how are drills communicated in their purpose, and so that there's some understanding there?
Sure. So we do really take that in account and try and find a balance of the challenge with too much communication before a drill is, again, it becomes that rote response. It becomes to use the evacuations. If I let everybody know the evacuation is at this day and time, well, half my staff are lined up ready to go at that day and that time. And that's not a real effective emergency reaction. It doesn't kind of make them force teaching staff to stop their teaching process. Where did I leave my clipboard with my emergency? How do I communicate with my students? So we try and find a balance with notification of our staff. So a couple things that go into that. Before most drills, like a week before, I send out an all-district email kind of saying, hey, you got a drill coming up before too long. It's going to be this type of drill. This is our focus. Pay attention to this. Let's work on this type of suggestions. And within that, I encourage our staff, because then they can have our teaching staff with expertise on what age they teach and how to have an appropriate conversation with their level kid, because that conversation obviously is a little different with preschoolers than it might be with seniors. So, I use the teaching staff's expertise to have that conversation on what's going on. We do identify, students that have previous trauma, or sometimes students that might have a seizure disorder, might be affected by the blinking lights in an evacuation system. So we do try and work through our student population so we're not increasing trauma later, because we do have students out there who have been through traumatic events, and we don't want to make that worse for them. When it comes to lockdown drills, because those are much more, the anxiety level is higher. It's much easier to have a miscommunication around a lockdown drill. Before those drills, I get on the PA, or I have school staff get on the PA and go, everybody, we're about to do a lockdown drill, just so you know. You know, we're going to start in a couple minutes, but this is a drill, and be real clear about that it's a drill, it's for practice, and make everybody aware of it, so we're not, calling lockdown out of the blue and worrying people. Because guess what will happen, particularly from about 5th grade on up? You guys will all get a text message, and then I'll get a bunch of phone calls, and I don't want to do that. So, and I tell the cops sometimes they think they should just go do something. I said, well, then I'm going to have them call you, and then they don't want to do that. So that's our kind of drill plan and try and work thing, and I'm always working with our responders of, hey, what can we do to make this a little bit more challenging? If they've got ideas, let me know. How do we put that in the school environment? One of the things that, just as an example, that we just finished a round of evacuation drills this month. One of the things I was talking with them about is, hey, how would it work instead of like us all being here? How about we respond from our stations and just give staff a better realistic sense of what does it look like when the fire truck rolls up, and how do we work through that more realistically? So.
Okay, good. Here- Okay, and the next one's for you too, so.
Me? I've been talking so much.
I'm
I think Jamie said, why don't you answer so that I actually get a chance to talk? Just to comment a little on what are the emotional impacts of the drills on kids. By and large, and this might be sort of common sense, but by and large, it isn't the drill that has the emotional impact on kids. Drills are just that. They're rote procedures, they're rote activities that the whole school is doing. It's something that is sort of designated, and they do it, and they kind of follow it. It's something that we've been doing since all of us were around, regardless of the kind of drill that happens. There are certainly exceptions for kids, like Travis mentioned, that might have sort of idiosyncratic or individual experiences related to some of the specific events that might be kind of being called to attention in the drill. The real thing that has an impact on kids are the wider events, when things happen to people that they know or people that they identify with, or groups that they might feel familiar with or identify with socially. And then, more importantly, the response of the family when those things happen. Sometimes saying nothing about a major event that a kid hears about in school is more detrimental or more emotionally damaging than saying something, even if it's scary or you don't know what to say. So to allay the concern that the drills really aren't the emotionally triggering aspects, they're things that we need to do, they're things that we become accustomed to, and they're very important in terms of being able to have a kind of muscle memory, rote response. If we do get hit with a crisis or a threat situation, we don't think about crisis and threat situations using the smart part of our brain. We tend to use the middle part of our brain, which is more primitive. It thinks about fight or flight, but it isn't walking through procedures and steps. So the drills are really an essential part of teaching a kind of a group community or a group mentality, how to kind of do things that are proven to be safe. So even if they tend to be a little bit triggering for some people, they're definitely important and they're definitely worth it.
Okay, how can we support families with a troubled child? Usually these children are already in conflict, possibly with law enforcement. And I think a piece next to that, another question is, if the public recognizes someone who's in unstable mental health, someone that's in crisis, what systems are there to support them? And, basically, what do people do? And how can we support families with a troubled child? That's where this is going. Okay.
Wow, welcome back. So the first question is around how to support families, I think you said, right?
Yes.
With kids going through troubles. There are lots of supports in the community here in Summit County, actually for a small, considered rural community, rural county. We actually have a pretty robust social support system here. We have a community mental health center, that's Mind Springs Health. We have a really well-informed police and legal protection system. And when I say well-informed, I mean well-informed about mental health issues. So if you remember nothing else, 911, right? And that can start a sort of chain of command. Certainly they don't want to be getting calls that aren't emergent, but gosh, if you remember nothing else, we're, like Jamie said, we're all linked. We have the Family and Intercultural Resource Center, which over the years has been growing their family support and social support programming in ways that are also setting sort of trends nationally, I would say, in terms of the way they're trying to support the community and connect people, and make sure people don't fall through the cracks. We have the emergency department and hospital system. We have the community care clinic as an integrated health center that has more robust behavioral services, behavioral health and mental health services than any other integrated care clinic or federally qualified health center in a 200-mile radius. And that's because we know there's a need and we've stepped up to meet the need. So those are some of the places, the other agencies that families can reach to. I think it's really important to note that the hope is that families can reach to other families, right? That parents can reach to other parents, that kids can reach to teachers. We can't underestimate the importance of a collectivist sort of society, a collectivist community. Part of what happens in mental health incidents and part of the perpetuating problem is a movement towards people feeling like they have to be so individualistic, families feeling like they have to do it on their own, individuals feeling like they have to do it on their own. And what that does is it creates isolation, it perpetuates problems of loneliness, feelings like you're a burden, feelings like you're misunderstood. We are inherently social creatures. We are hardwired to be social. That's a part of our neurobiology. We know people die sooner. They have poor health outcomes if they aren't connected in relationship to other people. We see it if someone's holding a hand during an MRI or not holding a hand during an MRI. The pain receptors that are shown in the MRI are all over the place if they feel lonely or they're not holding a loved person's hand. So reaching out to community, talking about what's going on, not feeling like you're crazy, not feeling like, oh my God, people are going to judge me. That all comes back to stigma reduction. These are things that affect all of us, especially in the early stages. And then if we don't catch them and we don't support each other in the early stages, they become big things that affect all of us in the big crisis stages. And that's kind of what we're here talking about, trying to prevent. So those are some of the things that we have available to support families. And in terms of individual young people with who might be demonstrating troublesome behaviors, communicating problematic emotional feelings. I say problematic, but it's really just like emotions, right? I think the biggest thing that we can all do is listen first, and maybe even before that is ask. Again, that kind of goes back to feeling like there's something wrong with you if you're not handling things perfectly. Especially we've seen a wave in the millennial generation around feeling like everything has to be perfect. You're supposed to be perfect all the time. Life is supposed to unfold and you're supposed to make a lot of money and that means you're supposed to be happy. And as we all know, as we get older, life is about the ups and downs. It's about the highs and the lows, and that's what truly makes it rich. And I'd say most of us probably still struggle with acceptance of that even still. It's exceptionally important for our young people. So asking how they're doing, not always trying to problem solve because that sends a message that whatever you're feeling is wrong and you should feel differently. All sorts of feelings or information, they're all important. And then certainly if you ever get that tingle or that sensation or that intuition that this feels kind of serious, or this feels off, or this feels scary to me, or this person that I love is feeling distant from me, or feeling like they're hiding. That should be the moment where you slow down a little bit, take a deep breath, and reach further for that person, or reach to someone else that might be able to reach that young person, and that might be a teacher. It might be a school counselor. It might be some strange professional like myself. Usually we're the last ones to get involved. But it's really about those relationships and whoever that person will connect with. As parents, it's really hard when your kids get to the age that they don't want to talk to you, and it feels like a failure as a parent. And I think because of our own personal feelings sometimes that our kids don't want to talk to us, we maybe don't want them to talk to somebody else, or we assume that it's okay. I mean, we could go on and on about all of the psychological reasons for not sending our kids to someone else to talk to them, because we feel like it's supposed to be our job. But if you're your kid's therapist, that's probably not a great thing, right? So whoever they'll talk to, we have a lot of research that shows that it only takes one person, it takes one good relationship to buffer and to bring about resilience for somebody who's struggling. That might be a parent, it might be an aunt or an uncle, it might be a really solid friend, it might be a counselor, it might be a teacher, it's often teachers. So remembering that you don't have to be everything for a child, you don't have to be everything for your friend or a family member, that there's a lot of people out there that can help in different ways, and it really takes a lot of people playing different roles. So, and then the last piece I'll say about that is if you try all that and you're still concerned, be relentless. Be relentless, and don't be afraid to draw a hard line, whether that's bringing law enforcement on if it really feels scary or threatening, or abnormal, right? Or doing things that you're like, oh my God, this might jeopardize a relationship for now, but be relentless if you continue to be concerned. And make sure it's not about you, it's about them.
Here's a couple of questions about how does law enforcement deal with cyberbullying, and what's law enforcement's training level in this area? These are very dangerous and wrong situations, so how is that dealt with, and how are kids educated about cyberbullying and the ills from that?
I'll let you cover the education piece. So the cyberbullying piece, it's happening all the time. We are, because the digital media world is constantly changing, I mean, every day it's changing, that it's actually difficult for law enforcement to keep up. We send our investigative staff to training all the time in the digital world.
Specific on that, that was my question for this year. Specifically, what training will law enforcement have this year to, because it's at no fault of your own, law enforcement is so behind on cyber, just how it is. What training this year will you guys get? Not just how to talk to parents, the whole aspect, what's going on this year?
So what Johanna's asking is that, as I had stated, we send our law enforcement investigative staff, patrol staff, everybody we can to digital investigations, to the social media. Like I said, it's changing literally every day. When we come up against an obstacle, a challenge, we reach out to our federal partners because they've got a lot better training than even we do, and they have access to better training equipment than we do, and they have also better access to the internet than we do. So that's always going on. It's a continual thing. I can let Travis talk about what they talk to the kids about.
So it's certainly a challenging topic for schools. I think it's one that we really try and involve parents with too. Again, it's also a very level discussion because the needs of a high school student are very different than the needs of an elementary student in terms of the social media world. But both of them have needs around it. They're in our district, I think everybody's probably familiar, but we went what we call one-to-one, one-to-world, not a couple of years ago. So every student, was it third grade and up? Second grade and up? Thank you, Ms. Bueller. Second grade and up has their own district-supplied device and has access to the whole wide world of the internet through that, potentially. So it does take a partnership with parents, and I know that sometimes, as the sheriff was saying, it can be an uncomfortable topic for parents, so we try and provide them resources, and then at the different buildings, checking in. Sometimes it's through the health curriculum, sometimes it's through a curriculum that has to do with just broader digital citizenship. And then, we're always looking at bullying and cyberbullying as part of that, and some different programs that we put in place. That's frankly a little bit out of my expertise, so I don't have.